Good afternoon. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notice that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligentsia prior to these hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I note now that the hour has come. This is a committee of City Council's Committee on People with Disabilities and Special Needs. I will ask Mr. Terry if you could please call the roll to take attendance. Members that are present in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, if you say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council Member Brooks.
Good afternoon, I'm present.
Council Member Gim.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm present.
Thank you.
And Mr. Terry, I know that Councilmember Swilla is also in the process of getting in. He's having some technical difficulties. I will note that we have members from the committee who are present, and this hearing is called to order. This is a public hearing of the Committee on People with Disabilities and Special Needs regarding resolution number 200108. Mr. Terry, if you could read the title to the resolution.
Resolution number 200108, authorizing the Committee on People with Disabilities and Special Needs to hold hearings to examine current and best practices on secondary transition services for Philadelphia Public School students.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have here for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in this meeting, you're consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments that they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. I want to thank all of the members of this committee that are here this afternoon. In addition, I want to thank those who are here to testify regarding this important issue and conversation. For those who are on this panel, on these panels, and members of the public that are witnessing this hearing, some things that you should know that we have close to, I'll say over 19,000 students, to be approximately about 19,487,000 students who are receiving special education services from the School District of Philadelphia. That's 5 times the largest school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As well, students who receive services are entitled to have free access to public education under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and under that they're also supposed to receive an individualized education plan, or IEP. And as for, especially as part of the IEP, students who are 14 years or older are supposed to have transition services as a part of the IEP process. Recent research that occurred through the Pennsylvania Department of Education that at the local level, about 62% of the IEPs that were reviewed did not meet the federal guidelines for transition services. And also further looking at those guidelines, when you look at IEPs and looking at 1 year after a child has left the district, we're only seeing about 29% who are in some type of higher education, 59% who are in some type of higher education or in a level of employment, and 76% who are either in higher education, some level of employment, or in some type of training program. Now, to help with this process, each state in the nation has a vocational rehabilitation office. Here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And so one of the challenges that we've seen when you think about the number of students in the school district that are receiving special education services, there's a significant need for additional assistance from the State Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. In fact, based on recent studies, only about 190 IEP meetings had participation from the state office. Of that number of students receiving services, only about 291 received referrals, and only about 186 students actually had transitions to summer jobs opportunities. So this is an issue that is very important when you think about the number of students in our city that are receiving special education services. For me, this is also something that's very personal. Having a son who's been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. When he was diagnosed back in 2003, 1 out of every 200 children were diagnosed on the spectrum. Now we're seeing numbers of 1 out of every 54 and 1 out of every 48 boys. And so this cohort of young people will be growing, and the majority of your life is not from birth to 21, but from 21 until someone transitions. And so the fact we have such a large number of students in the school district receiving special education services, we need to do all that we can to prepare these students and their families for transition post high school. And so the goal of this conversation today is to talk about the work that we're doing and making a better connection on the services that we're providing to young people in the city of Philadelphia as they transition out of their education platform. And with that, I would like to have Mr. Terry read the names for our first panel that are here to testify this afternoon.
Darlene Hemerka, Otis Hackney, Julia Barol.
If you could just state your name for the record, your name and title, and then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Darlene Hemerka, and I'm a staff attorney at the Public Interest Law Center. I joined the Law Center in 2017 and spent my first 2 years working to ensure that students in Philadelphia with disabilities who have individualized education programs, or IEPs, can successfully transition to life after high school. Under the law, schools are required to help students with disabilities ages 14 to 21 set individualized goals around post-secondary education, employment, and independent living, using age-appropriate assessments that take into account the student's interest and skills. Schools must then provide transition services, an individualized, coordinated set of activities designed to help the student achieve their post-school goals. Examples of transition services include daily living skills, travel training, self-advocacy skills, particularly around a student's disability, work-based learning experiences, and activities around applying to college and vocational schools. This process, known as transition planning, is critical to ensuring that students with disabilities leave school with the skills they need to be independent and economically self-sufficient, and it should be the centerpiece of a student's IEP as the student approaches graduation or age 21. when they are no longer eligible for special education services. Nevertheless, many transition-age students in Philadelphia are not getting the support, services, and resources to which they are entitled to under the law. Transition services have been required under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, since 1990. Despite this requirement, since 1990, and these services are essential to the statute's goals, which are to enable individuals with disabilities to enjoy equal opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency, and to leave high school with the skills to either pursue post-secondary education or training, or to get a good job and be contributing members of our communities. While school districts must provide transition services under the IDEA, both state and federal laws recognize that schools can't be the only entities preparing students with disabilities for life after high school. In 2014, Congress passed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, with goals to improve employment outcomes for young people with disabilities and prioritize competitive integrated employment, defined as work alongside non-disabled people for at least minimum wage. In order to improve the employment outcomes of young people with disabilities, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act requires vocational rehabilitation agencies, which are state agencies that are responsible for helping people with disabilities prepare for, obtain, and maintain employment, to expand the services they provide to include pre-employment transition services. Pre-employment transition services are activities designed to provide an early start to the job exploration process for students with disabilities ages 14 to 21. The law requires that vocational rehabilitation agencies, including Pennsylvania's Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, use 15% of their federal funds for pre-employment transition services. However, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is clear that pre-employment transition services are intended to supplement and not replace the transition services that are required under the IDEA. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act also puts new restrictions on when an individual with a disability, age 24 or younger, can enter segregated sub-minimum wage employment, sometimes known as a sheltered workshop. Under the law, before an individual can be placed in a sheltered workshop, he or she must receive pre-employment transition services or transition services and be referred to the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation for services and receive career counseling. The law also imposes new requirements and limitations on sub-minimum wage employers and schools. In addition, a state law known as the Work Experience for High School Students with Disabilities Act requires the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to publish quarterly reports about the number of students with disabilities it is serving by county. The purpose of the law is to ensure collaboration between school districts and the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation so that students with disabilities are prepared to enter the workforce upon graduation. These laws reflect research that, over the last 30 years, has shown that even students with the most complex needs can work in competitive integrated employment with the right supports. For a student whose goal is to achieve competitive integrated employment, the most effective transition services include the following: paid work in integrated settings rather than pre-vocational training, person-centered assessment approaches in integrated settings, qualified and trained school personnel, and interagency collaboration between schools, vocational rehabilitation agencies, and developmental disability service agencies. Despite the laws and the research, the outcomes for Philadelphians with disabilities are poor. For example, according to a 2016 report by the Mayor's Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity, 24% of Philadelphians with disabilities were unemployed and 33% lived in poverty. It is estimated that there are anywhere between 6,000 and 14,000 students in the School District of Philadelphia entitled to transition planning each year, and data shows that a significant number of these students are not getting these vital services. For example, for the 2017-2018 school year, only 38% of the School District of Philadelphia IEPs complied with the transition requirements under federal law, meaning the IEP included measurable post-school goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments and transition services. In addition, according to the 2018 Post-School Outcome Survey, only 29% of students who had an IEP when they left high school were enrolled in higher education within 1 year of leaving school, and only 59% of students were either enrolled in higher education or employed within 1 year of leaving school. The 2019 post-school outcome results were consistent with the 2018 results. Only 22% of students who had an IEP when they left high school were enrolled in higher education within 1 year of leaving school, and only 69% of students were either enrolled in higher education or employed within 1 year of leaving school. Moreover, the data published by the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, as required by the Work Experience for High School Students with Disabilities Act, shows that there is not enough collaboration between the school district and the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation in Philadelphia. According to the 2018-2019 reports, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation staff members attended fewer than 200 IEP meetings and made fewer than 300 job referrals for students in Philadelphia. Meanwhile, there is currently a wait list for new customers to receive individualized services from the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation because there is not enough funding to meet the demand. Therefore, young people with disabilities are forced to wait for these important services once they leave school. School District of Philadelphia and the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation have created one successful partnership using a research-based model called Project Search, which offers students opportunities to work with job coaches and obtain meaningful work-based learning experiences. However, due to a lack of resources, fewer than 25 students are able to participate in this program each year. Furthermore, the pandemic has brought a host of new challenges for the School District of Philadelphia, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, the city, students, and their families. But poor outcomes for students with disabilities existed long before the pandemic, as illustrated by the data. In addition, pandemic or no pandemic, transition-age students are going to be leaving school soon and need the preparation and tools to succeed. Therefore, I urge City Council to make sure that there are people with an understanding of special education on the Board of Education, ask questions related to transition planning and services during the annual budget hearings, increase the resources available to the School District of Philadelphia, pressure the School District of Philadelphia to provide training and support to high school teachers about best practices in transition planning, offer internships for students with disabilities at your offices and encourage other employers to do the same, explore whether the city can provide tax incentives to businesses that hire people with disabilities, and encourage more universities to serve as Project Search partners or other based research employment programs. By all working together, we can create more opportunities for high school students with disabilities to gain the skills they need to succeed in life after high school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hermica. Esquire, if you could have the next witness testify, and then we'll have questions from members of council. Mr. Hackney, you are on mute.
It's just taking a minute to come off. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Otis Hackney. I'm the Chief Education Officer for the City of Philadelphia. I would like to begin by thanking Councilmember Green and the members of the Committee on People with Disabilities and Special Needs for inviting me to offer testimony today regarding Resolution 200108 to discuss secondary transition services for Philadelphia public school students. The Mayor's Office of Education provides leadership in the City of Philadelphia with the goal of ensuring quality education for all. To achieve this mission, we advance key education policy initiatives and forge partnerships with diverse stakeholders to strengthen the local education continuum and ensure that all education systems have the resources they need. As a representative of the Mayor's Office, I also want to acknowledge this administration's deep commitment to the population of students being discussed today. In 2017, Mayor Kinney, through Executive Order 717, reaffirmed his support for the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities, which had existed for over 20 years. The commission is currently led by Court Weiber. My team works closely with Court as well as other stakeholders to support policies and processes that advance the education of all Philadelphians. As an example, my office recently partnered with the Mayor's Commission on Disabilities Office of Information Technology, the Mayor's Office of Policy, the school district and charter schools to launch PHL Connected, a program to ensure that students have access to high-speed internet needed to participate in virtual learning. Ensuring this opportunity is available to families with special needs students has been at the forefront of our conversation as we launch PHL Connected. Another initiative being headed up by my office is the Cato Scholarship, which offers free college and basic needs support for Community College of Philadelphia for eligible students starting in January of 2021. My office also serves as the liaison to the School Board of Philadelphia for the City of Philadelphia, which, as you know, was reconstituted by Mayor Kinney in 2018, returning our city's schools to local control. These efforts all aim to provide students with the supportive networks and supports that are critical to advancing their education, both in and out of the classroom. We know that education does not stop after senior year. We also know that quality education for all means intentional partnerships and planning for each student to ensure that they meet their full potential and are prepared for life after high school. From my time as a principal at South Philadelphia High School, I know how critical this is, especially for students who have an individual education plan, meaning they have additional needs that require specialized attention. Providing these students with the tools they need to thrive beyond high school was and is always a priority for educators and post-secondary experts and businesses. Like this committee, I offer supports increasing quality, community-based post-secondary transition opportunities for students with disabilities. While these are difficult times for all of us, we are confident that the School District of Philadelphia and charter schools will redouble their efforts to ensure that students of transition age have the opportunity to experience work-based learning, both virtually and when it is safe, with employers based in the community. We look forward to continued support from City Council, increased funding from the General Assembly in Harrisburg, as well as a renewed collaboration with the state's Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to improve upon the data being discussed today. The district will be speaking shortly about the work they're doing to support all students to be college and career ready. This work is a true partnership between parents, educators, community members, and the students themselves. I look forward to continuing to be a part of the conversation as we move this important work forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. The next witness is Julia Barrow.
Good afternoon. My name is Julia Barrow, and I currently serve as president of the Pennsylvania Association of People Supporting Employment First, known as APSE. My graduate degree is in secondary special education and transition, And I thank Councilmember Green and other members of the committee for the opportunity to submit testimony to City Council today on transition best practices. A truly successful transition process is the result of comprehensive team planning that is driven by the dreams, desires, and abilities of youth. A transition plan provides the basic structure for preparing an individual to live, work, and play in the community as fully and independently as possible. Transition services are intended to be comprehensive, multi-layered, and individualized. It must be coordinated with professionals across agencies to decrease any duplication of services. Over the past 3 decades, transition practices research has demonstrated that post-school outcomes of students with disabilities improve when educators, families, students, and community members and organizations work together to implement a broad perspective of transition planning, more appropriately referred to as transition-focused education. In general, this concept represents the perspective that transition planning is the fundamental basis of education that guides development of students' educational programs, including strategies that keep them in school, rather than an add-on activity for students with disabilities when they turn age 14. The impact of transition-focused education is greatly enhanced when service systems and programs connect and support the implementation and application of such learning. The taxonomy for transition programming provides concrete practices identified from effective programs and the research literature for implementing transition-focused education. The taxonomy brings in the latest literature regarding predictors of post-school success, strategies, graduation and reduced dropout, school climate, and vocational rehabilitation services focused on fostering successful transition of youth with disabilities in college and careers. The model continues with 5 primary practice categories: student-focused planning, student development, interagency collaboration, family engagement, and program structure. It includes additional practices in the area of student supports and the instructional context within student development, as well as school climate and program structure. Within family engagement, a focus on cultural relevancy, empowerment, and family preparation are emphasized. Across categories, collaboration with service agencies, especially vocational rehabilitation, emphasize the importance of such connections prior to and during school and post-school transitions. In addition to the taxonomy, both the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, make clear that transition services require a coordinated set of activities for a student with a disability within an outcome-oriented process. This process promotes movement from school to post-school activities, such as post-secondary education, and includes vocational training and competitive integrated employment, active student involvement, family engagement, and cooperative implementation of transition activities, as well as coordination and collaboration between the Philadelphia Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, the Pennsylvania Bureau of Special Education, and the School District of Philadelphia, which are essential to the creation of a process that results in no undue delay or disruption in service delivery. The student's transition from school to post-school activities is a shared responsibility. WIOA also stresses the collaborative process to promote positive outcomes for transition-aged youth. WIOA expanded the role for vocational rehabilitation in transition activities, requiring early involvement with students transitioning from school to employment and post-secondary education. It also promotes increased coordination with the state education agency, the Pennsylvania Bureau of Special Education, and with the local education agency or the School District of Philadelphia. The law urges increased community-based work opportunities for youth with a movement away from transition goals that include segregated settings. The provisions related to the work of vocational rehabilitation in schools creates a continuum of services that aligns with IDEA, but does not supplant the legal responsibility of the schools. It is mandated that VR, along with the state and local education agencies, jointly develop a system so that students achieve competitive, integrated employment. Whether the student's next step is employment or entering a post-secondary training or an educational program, it is important for students with disabilities to obtain as much work experience as possible to prepare for adult life. Community-based work experiences allow the student or youth with a disability to explore potential careers related to the specific educational goal, potential workplace environments and demands, and other aspects of the work. These experiences offer the student opportunities to gain firsthand knowledge of a particular job skill or to learn the culture of day-to-day employment. These experiences can be offered in lieu of or to supplement vocational training or education programs, or as a standalone service. WIOA defined competitive integrated employment as employment with earnings comparable to those paid to individuals without disabilities in a setting that allows them to interact with individuals who do not have disabilities. Supported employment is competitive integrated employment or employment in an integrated work setting in which individuals with the most significant disabilities are working in competitive integrated employment while receiving ongoing support services on a short-term basis in order to support and maintain those individuals in employment. It is especially important to mention that WIOA amended Title V of the Rehab Act by adding Section 511, which limits the use of sub-minimum wage. Section 511 demonstrates the intent that individuals with disabilities, especially youth with disabilities, must be afforded a full opportunity to prepare for, obtain, maintain, advance in, or re-enter. Section 511 also aligns with Pennsylvania's Employment First Act 36 of 2018, which is built on the cornerstone that competitive integrated employment is the first and preferred outcome for working age youth and adults with disabilities, especially those.
Hello.
Hey, can you get on the phone with Joe right now?
Yep. Can I bring Nick on?
At a minimum or competitive wages and with benefits. Section 511 is especially vital to those whom job placement in the past has been limited or traditionally has not occurred. It ensures that individuals with disabilities have access to information and services that will enable them to achieve competitive integrated employment. It includes requirements for state VR agencies, sub-minimum wage employers, and local and/or state education agencies, including specific requirements for youth prior to their participation in sub-minimum wage employment. In addition, Section 511 prohibits the state education agency and the local education agency, or the School District of Philadelphia, from entering into contracts or agreements with community rehabilitation providers to transition youth into segregated programs. Schools currently contracting with agencies holding sub-minimum wage certificates will no longer be able to continue. Schools and OVR can use community rehabilitation providers to provide services in community integrated settings. Expectations also play a critical role to success in employment and post-secondary educational settings. Low expectations are often cited as significant barriers to academic and career achievement for students with disabilities. For example, the Government Accountability Office found that attitudinal barriers of faculty and support service providers in post-secondary education settings have been shown to inhibit the performance of students with disabilities. In contrast, setting high expectations for students with disabilities promotes successful post-school transition. Research demonstrates that students with disabilities do better when they're held to high expectations and have access to the general education curriculum. As a part of the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth's Guideposts for Success, I will conclude with their recommendations for school-based preparatory experiences for services, supports, and opportunities that all youth need. I hope that these help in future discussions with the School District of Philadelphia to focus on systems-based improvements to ensure all youth with disabilities in the district have access to meaningful transition services. The NCWD/Youth recommends rigorous, relevant, and inclusive academic, curricular, and program options that employ high quality and engaging instructional practices tailored to the needs of diverse learners. This includes rigorous courses, applied learning, progress assessments, interventions to reduce barriers, personalized instruction, career guidance, and skill building. This also includes social emotional learning integrated with academics, internet and technology access, and re-engagement options. Students need a safe and supportive learning climate and an environment characterized by high expectations, small personalized communities within the school, a participatory climate that promotes safety and belonging as well as inclusive school practices. Students need access to effective educators demonstrated by the following attributes and practices: appropriate qualifications and professional development, educator externships and co-learning, educators who communicate support, respect, high expectations, and positive regard, have high quality instructional practices and positive behavioral supports, are engaging and responsive to diverse learners, and are skilled in the use of technology and other resources. Teachers need post-secondary education success strategies, including multiple measures of post-secondary readiness, comprehensive advising services, comprehensive integrated supports, and co-requisite course options for developmental education. I would urge City Council to encourage the School District of Philadelphia to move forward with the competitive RFQ number 221 on secondary transition program for aged students with disabilities to help build capacity and improve qualifications for teachers working with transition-aged youth. I would urge City Council to encourage better flow of communication and collaboration between stakeholders working with Philadelphia transition-aged youth. Those stakeholders include the School District of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, as well as workforce development. I would encourage City Council to require better accessibility for youth with disabilities and their families in our multicultural city to access services and supports by adding resources to support English as a second language speakers. I would encourage City Council to really make Philadelphia an employment-first city by creating pathways to employment and careers for transition-aged youth as a part of Philadelphia city hiring practices to include recruiting, hiring, promoting, and retaining these individuals at percentages that mirror the federal regulations as seen in Section 503. I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today.
Thank you, Ms. Burrell, for your testimony. I want to thank this panel for your testimony this afternoon. I also want to note for the record that we've been joined by Councilmember Mark Squilla. With that, I just have a few questions, and I'll allow other members of council to ask questions by putting that interest or request in the chat feature. I'll start with Ms. Hemmerker. You stated some specific points. I want to make sure I have them, that you made recommendations. One, you made reference to having a member of the school board be someone that is knowledgeable, either a person that has a physical learning difference or someone that has a strong perspective in that regard. Also, you made reference to Project Search, which is an initiative that I'm very familiar with, having had a chance to tour Project Search, and that's a joint activity with Drexel University. I know the Philadelphia Autism Project's been supportive of that, and they've also done initiative with the Hill Freedman School. Finally, you talked about internships in reference to city offices for those who are in a transition phase. And the last point, you talked about tax credits for businesses that hire people that have a physical or learning difference. I think I gathered most of your points, but I want to make sure I did not leave any out. But I also want to thank you for your work in helping us pull together this hearing with a number of the witnesses that are scheduled to testify, and for your advocacy on this issue.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. I think you hit all the points.
Okay, and one other point you did raise, and something that we've done traditionally is in the budget process, is try to address issues in reference to how various departments are doing things regarding people that have a learning or special needs. I know we have seen some growth here in the city of Philadelphia in reference to employment. The Philadelphia Airport has had a history of hiring those that have had a physical learning difference at the airport. Other city departments have started to move forward in that regard, but we have so much more to do. And one of the things that I've been very engaged in is been working with Special Olympics, and we have been working on making the city of Philadelphia the world's premier city of inclusion for those that have a physical or learning difference, with a goal of 2026, which is when the country turns 250. We're focusing on 5 areas, which are housing, healthcare, access to information and services, education, and employment. And I think the points you raised are very strong points in that regard. I will ask some additional questions to other panelists, and if other members of council would like to ask a question, feel free to indicate in the chat feature. Mr. Hackney, I wanted to ask you in reference to the process for a new member of the school board. I know Mr. Akbar had recently resigned from the school board. I remember him from his work at Youth Build Charter School and the advocacy that he did for young people at that school prior to joining the school board. I know he's dealing with a family matter, which has caused him to resign from the school board. But listening to the point raised by one of your fellow panelists, what's the process for another member of the school board to be appointed, as well as, I think she raises a very good point, having someone on the school board that has either a learning or physical difference or has a understanding of those issues, especially when you think of the significant number of children that have received special needs services in the school district. That number will only grow, and especially just on the area of autism. I know that number is growing just based on my own experiences with young people on the spectrums, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. Thank you for that question. And yes, so for the school board, and my thoughts and supports are going out to former school board member Akbar. Yes, we were very happy and proud to be able to bring him on board. It's unfortunate that he has that family obligation that he has to deal with. So we just want to send continued support to Amin Akbar. He's a good guy. And so the process for the school board, it's going to be similar to what we've had to do when we brought the school district back to local control. We have to put a nominating panel together, which we have, and that group will solicit applications. So that will be rolling out shortly, actually, because we do have those seats that are open that we would like to get filled. And so that application process will be opening, and we will need residents of the city of Philadelphia to apply. We look for people who have varied skill sets and experiences to fill those seats on the board. And they will interview with the nominating panel. And then once the nominating panel identifies their recommendations. They have to recommend 3 names per seat that's available. So when they send those names up to the mayor, and then the mayor and the mayor's office does, or we do as a member of the mayor's office, help that with that selection process with the mayor in order to make recommendations to go before council. So the process is different. Former board member, school board member Akbar was the first to actually receive council approval. So people who are moving forward now will have to go before council. So that is important. When we think about the skill sets, we want people that reflect the diversity of our city. And when we look at that, we don't need each individual to do so. We look at the composition of the board to make sure that different students, different communities, different populations are represented. So this is actually a good opportunity to let folks know to look out for when it's announced for applications. And so that way, parents, people of the public who would like to have an opportunity to participate, to apply. So we definitely will need people to apply to be a part of this process. And we're looking forward to that process and hoping that we can identify people who have and understand governance in terms of, you get to sit on a 9-member board that is responsibility, not for the operations of the district, but definitely for the governance and oversight of a $4 billion entity. And so that person has to have the time and understanding of the complex issues that in terms of the decisions that board members need to make to help support the superintendent and the district overall to create amazing educational opportunities for students. Because in the end, that's where those decisions are made, are supposed to positively impact the students that we all serve.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney, for that response. As was stated, and I think I indicated based on my comments, we need to have a more inclusive perspective and representation on the school board. I know there's been a push historically for diversity from the perspective of ethnicity, from the perspective of gender, from the perspective of orientation, but we still tend as a city to do things from an ableist perspective. And I think having a diversity in reference to experiences for someone that may have a physical learning difference, as well as someone that has that close experience would be the type of diversity that's not always discussed, but I think is important in representative school district when you think of the significant number of young people in the district that receive special education services. And then lastly, Ms. Burrell, you gave a very detailed overview, a number of the issues and perspectives that you've seen from your experience and background. Can you provide briefly some examples of either jurisdictions or school districts that have had effective programs? We've talked about Project Search and the need for that to be expanded, but have you seen in your experience other jurisdictions that have had very effective programs and have done a better job in expanding access to services for young people in reference to transition services within the IEP or IDA?
I would recommend Allegheny County School District. I think that they are doing a really good job in supporting transition age youth and youth with disabilities. Although not the same size as Philadelphia, I think that they, as a large city, can provide some really great observations and opportunity to learn from the work that they're doing to help improve outcomes in Philadelphia.
Okay, thank you for that recommendation. Seeing no other questions for this panel, I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon. Want to move into a slight change on the witness lineup due to the delay because of the prior hearing. I want to give an opportunity for students and parents to testify. Because we've been on here for a period of time, I think having their input and want to make sure they have the ability to testify at this hearing before we get into some of the other, at least the two other panels. So Mr. Terry, if you could read the names of the students and parents that are here to testify.
Justin Gabor, Cecilia Thompson, Antonio Spence, Lisa Johnson, Kimberly Williams, and Dawn Ang.
So for those who, Mr. Terry, who's given your name, if you could put your camera on so we can see you testify. For those of you who may have called in, we'll be ready for you to testify as well. Ms. Thompson, Ms. Johnson, I see you're coming in. Why don't we begin with Ms. Thompson and then we'll go to Ms. Johnson. Ms. Thompson, I believe you're on mute. If you could take yourself off mute, and we'll hear from Ms. Thompson, Ms. Johnson, and then Ms. Ang in that order.
Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm new to the Teams. If you could just give me one more minute,
Take
and I will promptly start. While I'm looking for this, can Ms. Johnson go so I don't hold up the process and then I can go after Ms. Johnson? Is that okay, Mr. Green?
That is fine. So if you could just put yourself on mute and then we'll go to Ms. Johnson to testify.
Thank you for the accommodation.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, thank you so much. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Lisa Johnson. I am a parent of 3. I have a 25-year-old son, an 18-year-old son, and a 13-year-old daughter. The latter 2 are students at Widener Memorial School. They are classified by the school district as students with multiple disabilities, or MDS, or low incidence. They both have a diagnosis of intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, speech impairment, and some secondary diagnoses. They both use wheelchairs for their mobility, assistive augmentative communication devices, leg orthotics, and a host of other assistive devices. Needless to say, they require an intensive level of support, but despite and in spite of their challenges, they are capable. In addition to my parental experience in advocating on behalf of my own children, I have been working as a program coordinator for a local advocacy organization for over 5 years now. Today, I'm here on behalf of my 18-year-old son, whose name is Bryce. Bryce is a gentle soul. He's humorous and enjoys spending time with his family. His laugh is infectious, and he has an instinctive aptitude of animals and bugs and is especially fond of cats and horses. He's also drawn to his peers and enjoys engaging in activities with them like playing basketball and gaming systems. I'm here to speak about my experience with the lack of appropriate transition services he's received from the School District of Philadelphia on his behalf. Pennsylvania law requires secondary transition services to begin at age 14 or younger as determined by the IEP team. Transition services did not begin for Bryce until he was 16 years old. Due to my son's rate of acquisition and the amount of repetition needed to master skills, he would have benefited from an earlier start, at the least an on-time start. In October 2018, a meeting was held regarding transition with the school's designated transition coordinator and the OVR rep assigned to Bryce's case. The OVR rep had no knowledge of Bryce's needs because he hadn't even taken the time to review Bryce's records or lay his eyes on him before we met. The designated transition coordinator for the school was a classroom teacher, untrained in transition services and not very knowledgeable about the process or the services required to appropriately meet the needs of Bryce. Neither professional had knowledge of any assessments that would have been appropriate for Bryce and tasked me, the parent, with the responsibility of reaching out to different providers to find more appropriate assessments that could be used. Of particular note, one of the professionals suggested, and I quote, they would reach out to a specific day program provider and request of them any vocational assessments they may use, and if they don't have one, request that they create one, possibly with a grant from OVR, since no one appears to be doing this, end quote. This interaction highlighted a lack of staff knowledge and training about transition planning and a lack of appropriate transition assessments for students with complex needs. At this time, Bryce was 16 and was being taken to Walmart only with a goal of matching items in the cart. That activity did not prepare him for competitive employment. A month later, Bryce was given the AAMD Becker Reading Free Vocational Interest Inventory for males by his classroom teacher. It was a black and white document with about 3 pictures in a box on a page. He was to look at the task being done in the picture and decide what may interest him by pointing to the picture. In November 2019, a similar assessment was administered on a smartboard. Keeping in mind the disabilities I shared earlier that Bryce lives with, this assessment was wholly inappropriate for various reasons. After asking for a more appropriate assessment, it was determined there wasn't any. I then requested an independent educational evaluation that included a request for him to be appropriately evaluated for transition by a professional not employed by the school district. The district denied my request. Since then, I've had countless conversations with the district around secondary transition services for my son. Still, no formal assessments have been administered, and the district continues to underestimate Bryce's abilities. My son is now 18 years old, and the only formal recommendation I've received for him is vocational rehab training at a local day program. As a professional in the advocacy field, I sometimes see groups of students with similar needs like my son's being taken to local day programs for community-based instruction trips. These programs are not community-based as they segregate people with disabilities from the rest of the community. This recommendation is inappropriate for Bryce at this time, especially given that there have been 0 attempts made for him to have inclusive career and/or volunteer exploration opportunities out in the community. He only has 3 more years of school left. Given a real fighting chance and the proper supportive services, my son would be able to lay the foundation needed to forge an everyday life for himself that he wants to live and is able to be an active participant in his own life. To date, he still has no official transition plan in place, and there seems to be no real intention of making the effort to develop a solid transition plan based on research-based interventions and data in order for him to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I also notice that Justin Gabor has also signed in, and we're going to have him testify during this panel. Ms. Johnson, are you ready to proceed?
Yes.
Okay, if you could just state your name for the record. Okay, thank you. There was some background noise, but Ms. Thompson, if you could proceed with your testimony, followed by Ms. Ang, and then we'll also hear Justin Gabor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important committee. My name is Cecilia Thompson, and I am the proud parent of a 22-year-old young man living with autism who is also a recent graduate of the class of June 2020 from the School District of Philadelphia. Despite my best efforts, advocacy, and involvement, the School District of Philadelphia, through Martin Luther King High School, has failed to provide the needed individualized transition services, which would have provided him independence, proper social skills, money management, a life skill, employment preparation, and a career and technical skills for the much needed quality of life, purpose, and fulfillment as an adult in the city of Philadelphia. I will start with independence via travel training. For the 7 years Trevor attended Martin Luther King High School, I advocated for the need for Trevor to participate in travel training. He already had a foundation in elementary school through a wonderful teacher named Miss Latoya Montgomery at Martin Luther King Elementary School. She provided the basics of travel training by teaching him how to identify signs, when to stop and yield at these signs, and the mechanics of when to cross the street at the red, yellow, and green lights. While these skills were not followed through in elementary school, I advocated for this skill upon entering 9th grade at Martin Luther King High School. Sadly, this skill was never implemented. Trevor had an educational one-to-one, which is a district employee, which I thought would be able to go out into the community with him. Again, I was told that only the classroom or itinerant teacher can leave the building with students. The plan of travel training was getting on the bus to either the indoor shopping mall or Center City and going to such establishments like the Dollar Tree stores. After 7 years at Martin Luther King High School, Trevor cannot navigate his surroundings, either walking or using public transportation. In terms of social skills, everyone's journey on the autism spectrum is unique. What works for one child does not automatically carry over to another child. I constantly advocated for Trevor to practice real-time conversation skills, especially with his receptive and expressive language. I suggested strategies and tools from after attending the autism conference in State College, including conversation starters, putting questions on a card, and putting those questions on a key ring, and having this practice repeated with another classmate or with the educational one-to-one, and then again practicing with peers. The excuse for refusing to do these proven research-based strategies shared at the PDE Autism Conference in State College is individuals hear language and pick up conversation. While this may work for some children and definitely works for neurotypical children, my son's brain and journey on the autism spectrum was not picking up these vital communication skills. Again, after 7 years at Martin Luther King High School, Trevor does not have the receptive and expressive language skills to communicate with anyone. In terms of money management, again, thanks to Miss Latoya Montgomery, Trevor learned money identification and how to tell time. However, he has no concept of money. This is because he constantly went to the Dollar Tree and similar establishments. He never learned how to go to a store to pick out an item and make change. While there are teachers who successfully do this within the School District of Philadelphia, and I was looking forward to having this skill taught to my son. Again, after 7 years at Martin Luther King High School, Trevor believes he only needs $1 to attend a movie, buy food, buy clothes, and does not understand or know how to count change from a purchase in a real-time experience. In terms of life skills, cooking, it was agreed upon because the kitchen was approximately 4 to 5 steps across the hall from his autistic support class. And after showing them a video of some basic cooking skills, such as boiling vegetables, that Trevor could participate in the culinary program, only their actual cooking class. Now, to note, because I left Trevor back for 2 years, he entered Martin Luther King High School as a 16-year-old. So the plan was for him to go into the 11th grade class, where the chef there welcomed him with open arms and even had a student who was left-handed, just like Trevor, to help with some basic cooking skills, such as cutting up and prepping vegetables and those type of things. However, when 10th grade came, due to the new leadership at Martin Luther King High School, this skill was not fully implemented in the school. Unfortunately, after 7 years at Martin Luther King High School, Trevor does not know how to make a simple meal, which would include a soup, salad, entree, dessert, and even homemade beverages. Employment preparation, job application, resume writing, and email. Again, during his 7 years at Martin Luther King High School, I advocated for Trevor to learn how to fill out an online job application, an online resume, and email. This was fought and refused by every teacher except the teacher he had for his last year at Martin Luther King High School, which unfortunately was cut short due to the pandemic. During his 6th year at MLK High School, staff from the Office of Specialized Services took the time to develop wonderful individualized materials for Trevor to learn how to complete a job application and fill out a resume. However, with the support of the principal, the teacher refused to even utilize these materials that, again, the wonderful people in the Office of Specialized Services developed and individualized for him. It was even said to me in a sarcastic way, how is Trevor going to fill out a resume when he does not even have a job? Furthermore, I advocated for Trevor to learn the skills needed to write and send an email, as this is crucial since many jobs communicate to employees through email. Again, with the support of the principal, the teacher refused to teach these skills. Again, this response was, he won't have a job where email is required, so what is the point? It's ironic that we are in the midst of a pandemic with virtual learning, where now every student needs to learn the valuable skill of email to communicate with their school. Once again, after 7 years at Martin Luther King High School, Trevor cannot complete a job application, develop a resume, nor construct, respond, and send an email. In terms of career and technical education, he originally started out in the graphic arts program, when at that time there was a graphic arts program for individuals living with autism. This skill was chosen based on a wonderful teacher at Middle Years Alternative, located at 48th and Fairmount, where the technology teacher actually showed him how to make a movie and a flyer. However, this program did not continue at Martin Luther King High School because the graphic arts teacher only showed up at school 2 to 3 days a week, which per the state, it appeared to be lack of participation. When this program was removed from the school, it was difficult finding an alternative CTE program for Trevor to participate. We found a program. Again, that teacher was accommodating and had a plan for Trevor's success. Due to circumstances beyond her control, she was unable to complete her stay at King. However, it was decided, unbeknownst to me, that Trevor would not participate in the business program because it was felt he could not understand it. He already has some preliminary skills of data entry and has some skills of writing via Microsoft products such as Microsoft Word and Excel. While I know the program does more than that, it was decided by the school that the tools he needed to be successful in this program were not going to happen. Once again, he left that program without being prepared to have any type of skill. As I close, there are other instances where the transition services were not tailored to Trevor's needs. Instead, the resistance for Trevor to fit into MLK High School's box, they did not work with Trevor to fit in Trevor's octagon based on his strength. In my opinion, as of today, Trevor has a worthless diploma. I urge the members of City Council, the members of this committee, do not have other children fail as my child was failed by the School District of Philadelphia through his stay at Martin Luther King High School. Yes, we have compensatory education, and we were blessed and fortunate to have and receive a consolidated waiver. However, you cannot make up for time past and, in my opinion, time wasted. Thank you, Councilman Green, members of this committee, and City Council for the opportunity to share my story this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Testimonies. We'll hear from Ms. Thompson. Also, I noticed that Justin Gabor actually had come on. If he can testify after Ms. Ang, and then just want to make a last call for Antonio Spence or Kimberly Williams. If they are on, they will testify after Mr. Gabor. Ms. Ang, you are scheduled to testify next. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Councilman Green. Good afternoon, Councilman Green and everyone in attendance. My name is Dawn Ang, and I am the mother of a 19-year-old who presents as one of the statistics I'm about to speak to. In the 2018-2019 academic year, the School District of Philadelphia had 1,230 students in the 12th grade who had IEPs, who either graduated or aged out of the district. Of the more than 1,200 students, the district reports that 49 went on to a 2 or 4 year college, 43 went on to trade school or technical training, 67 found jobs, 7 went on to the military, and another 17 continued to receive supportive services. That's merely 183 of the 1,230 students that the district has accounted for. This suggests that 1,047 students from this graduating class, all with IEPs, seem to have disappeared into the wind. We don't know what's become of them. Transition services are intended to prepare students with disabilities to move from school to post-school life. Services are supposed to be designed to meet the unique needs of each student and to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Current programs within the district that include community-based vocational training, Marriott Bridges, Project Search, transition schools are great. But what percentage of students are actually participating in one of these programs? So according to the district's 2018-2019 figures, only 360 of the more than 1,200 students. So for example, the Marriott Bridges program had a capacity for 60, but only 57 students participated. Of those, 21 were placed in jobs, and only 2 of the 21 were able to hold the job for more than 90 days. There's something wrong with this picture. It is unfortunate that I learned that the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, whose mission is to assist Pennsylvanians with disabilities to secure and maintain employment and independence, declined today's invitation to participate. It gives me a greater appreciation that the staff from the school district's Office of Specialized Services are in attendance today. It is clear from all the valuable information we're going to gather that greater collaboration and commitment from all stakeholders needs to take place. So, do we need to explore the possibility of beginning the transition process earlier than 14 years old? Can we identify each high incidence and low incidence students' strengths and skills and work towards transforming that to success in the workplace? Do we need to increase vocational training opportunities in transition schools and partnerships with area organizations and businesses? What are the workforce needs in the city? What skills do our students need to learn to meet these workforce needs? Hillco Redevelopment Partners is promising thousands of warehouse jobs in the future. Can we start a training pipeline now? So, for our differently abled population, now that we've begun to identify gaps in services and areas where improvements can be made, I hope to see a concerted, collaborative effort to ensure we can lay claim to the successes of every single child with an IEP who graduates or ages out of the district. I believe every single child has potential. When Ian, my son, was born 19 years ago, and we learned that he had Mobius and Poland syndromes, we were told by doctors to prepare for the possibility he might never eat independently, speak, or walk. 50 years ago, such children like Ian would have been institutionalized. But Ian's is a story of success. He graduated in 2019 from Julia R. Masterman High School and is a sophomore at Oberlin College now. But let me tell you that our journey was not a smooth one. I have spent the last 19 years educating myself about special education, fighting many battles along the way, just so that teachers, administrators, and therapists would work towards Ian's potential. I know how exhausting advocating within the district is. And now that Ian is off to college, I feel an obligation to put to use what I've learned over the 19 years to work towards ensuring that every child with an IEP has the opportunities I fought for Ian. I have worked with Councilman Squiller for more than a year on this path of how we can best identify and harness the strengths and potential of our special needs children so that many might become gainfully employed in adulthood. We see this population as an untapped workforce resource, replete with specific talent and tax-paying potential. We want to know how we might understand employer needs and how we might change the mindset of employers so they may be more open to hiring differently abled individuals. I hope all stakeholders at this hearing recognize this opportunity we have today to begin thinking out of the box, for solutions that our differently abled students transition to adulthood fully prepared to be engaged and contribute to our communities. Thank you.
Ms. Ong, thank you for your testimony. I did see that Ms. Kimberly Williams also, I think, joined this hearing. I want to provide opportunity for Justin Gabor, who I did see earlier, to provide testimony, as well as Kimberly Williams. I have a few questions, and I know Councilmember Squilla also has a question as well. So at this point, wanted to have Mr. Gabor to testify, and then after him, Kimberly Williams. And then there was another person listed to testify, Antonio Spence. If Mr. Spence is not available, then we'll go to the questions from myself and Councilmember Squilla. So Mr. Gabor, if you're available, please turn on your video so you can testify, and then we'll have Ms. Williams testify to round out this panel.
You might have to unmute.
Mr. Gabor, I think you are on mute.
I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good to go. Thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Gabor, if you could state your name and then proceed with your testimony.
Okay. So
Yes.
my name is Justin, and I'm going to read this. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Gabor, and I am a student at Abraham Lincoln High School. My favorite subject is science, and I love animals. When I graduate from high school, I want to work at a pet store. I want a sign language interpreter there with me to make it easier for me to talk to people. Having a job in my community is important to me because I like to help people and I like to have my own money. I know that I can work because I have had jobs during high school. I worked as a summer camp counselor at the Overbrook School for the Deaf, and as an interpreter at a summer program at my church. I got these jobs through the relationships that my parents and me had in the community. I wish there were more chances for me to work in the community as a student. One way City Council can help more students with disabilities like me and get job skills is by hiring us as interns to your offices and supporting other business in the city to hire us too. I also like to tell people about animals, how they live and eat. And
Their enemies.
their enemies.
Thank you.
And thank you,
Justin Gabor.
Justin Gabor.
Thank you, Justin, for your testimony. Since we have you on the camera, I'm going to ask if any of my colleagues have any questions for you. I have one question. Where do you attend school?
So,
Where do you attend school? You don't need that. Where do you go to school?
Abraham Lincoln High School.
Abraham Lincoln High School. Okay. And so you said when you finish school, you would like to work at a pet store?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you also thought about other jobs working with animals, like maybe the Philadelphia Zoo, or done internships?
Yes.
And explaining.
And
He loves to read. He likes to tell people all about what an animal does, what it eats, all kinds of things about them. We were away over the weekend. He was doing the demonstration for us. He'd really like to do that, or he'd like to be an interpreter. He was an interpreter. He had a job at Camp Overbrook for the Deaf at St. Joseph's University as a camp counselor. in sign language. He would have a couple kids and he would take them swimming or wherever, arts and crafts, whatever. He did that. So he has a lot of interests.
Okay.
Or even be an interpreter at church. He made his Holy Confirmation, Holy Communion at a deaf school.
And I don't want to make assumptions. Is that mom?
That's mom, yes.
Yes.
If you could just state for the record, for the stenographer, your name so we can have that for the record.
Hi, my name's Teresa Gabor. I'm Justin's mother.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. Also, if Justin or if your mom want to follow up with me, especially regarding the Philadelphia Zoo, I think one of the things I heard from a number of witnesses, not only this panel, but a previous panel, about trying to create more internships at various locations in the city that provide jobs. If you can follow up with me by way of an email, and I will put my email in the chat feature, but I would like to follow up on your behalf with the head of the Philadelphia Zoo, whose name is Vic Dewan, to see what type of internship opportunities may be there at the zoo. I know they have done various activity with individuals, both young adults and others that have physical learning differences. So I'd like to explore that opportunity, considering Justice's interest with animals. And I just put my name in and my email address in the chat feature if you have access to that.
I don't know if I have that. We had to go in as a guest because I couldn't get in. I have 3 things here, and his school district Chrome book.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that as well. So we'll find a way to reach out to you so maybe we can get you the information.
He's Justin Gabor, 708-0077.
Okay. We'll circle back to you. That way we make sure that we get your information. Okay.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you, and it was a nice.
Mr. Chairman, this is Councilmember Squilla. I too want to thank Justin for his testimony. I think it's so important to hear not only from obviously the advocates and the parents, but to hear from the children themselves and what it means to them. It's so important. And I really appreciate your courage and your tenacity to speak up in front of council so that we could hear directly from you. And it means a lot to us. So thank you and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate the testimony. Want to also hear from Kimberly Williams, and then we'll round out this panel because I know Councilmember Squilla also had a question for Ms. Ong, and then maybe some other questions for this panel. Ms. Williams, are you able to turn your video on?
Can you see me?
There we go. We can see you now.
All right. Are you ready for me?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I want to thank City Council and all those responsible for arranging this hearing today. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak on this matter, addressing the concerns regarding transition services for special education students in the Philadelphia School District. Today, I speak on this issue for my son, who aged out of the district at the end of the 2019-2020 school year. Some background about me. I am a product of the Philadelphia school system, starting my education journey over 25 years ago in North Philadelphia at General John F. Reynolds Elementary School with Mrs. Weekly as my kindergarten teacher and Dr. Henderson as our principal. I then attended Volks Junior High School and ended my public education after graduating from the Parkway Program Center City campus. I now hold a BS in psychology from Drexel University. Although I graduated many years ago from the district, Mrs. Weekly and Dr. Henderson had a lasting impact on me and my expectations of teachers and administrators in education. Also, being raised by multiple generations of educators who taught and served in this district, their beliefs and dedication influenced my appreciation of the public school system when it fulfills the purpose of educating all students. Before entering the district, my son was diagnosed with autism. His diagnosis and the data obtained from various assessments made him eligible for services and a student who would need intensive intervention throughout his years. Upon aging out of the system, he entered into a new domain with very minimal training. In my experience, the process and procedures surrounding transition services are severely flawed in the district. For example, when my son was getting ready to enter high school, he was extremely interested in art. However, instead of his IEP team considering this interest during the high school selection process and discussing what accommodations would allow him to be successful in a school with a program geared towards art, my son was simply assigned to a school that had an autistic support classroom. As my son approached the age of 21, transitioning to adulthood became a rising priority. I became anxious, nervous, and worried about his future at the start of each school year. As years quickly rolled by and there were multiple IEP meetings that included discussions about transition services, I realized no one truly knew what the next steps were going to be for my son, for a successful outcome for my son. Everyone knew the overarching goal for students to prepare for competitive employment or higher education or trade schools, but no one knew how to assess and develop the effective plan to reach those goals for each student individually. My son's teacher did not have the training needed to develop a coordinated plan and were not familiar with other agencies that provided resources around transition planning. As a parent, I was overwhelmed by the challenges that would soon be happening to my son's life, and I wish the district could have provided more information about the waiver system and the supported employment. My son was fortunate in that he was accepted into the Project Search program during his final year in the district. Through that program, he was travel trained and was able to get a job training in positions across Drexel's campus and receive job coaching. However, I know that because of a lack of resources, there are far fewer slots in programs like these and the number of students who need them. There aren't any accountability systems to ensure students are provided the intensive and intrusive planning and job training needed to compete in the workforce. This means the system fails these students and families and ultimately deprives society and organizations the opportunity to work with amazingly dedicated and hardworking individuals. At the time of transition, special education students differ in the number of supports they have in place. Even with people from their families, communities, and schools, they need even more support during the transition process. Once these individuals leave the hallways of our schools, they are thrust into a world unprotected. The district's responsibility is to develop transition programs that can decrease this vulnerability for our students by ensuring these students are provided opportunities to develop skills to persevere through these challenges. The shortfalls found in the transition planning process and the gaps in services are more profound for students like my son, who is already at a disadvantage due to systemic racial barriers. In the school district's data brief published in April 2020, it reports that in the 2018-19 school year, 74% of students with IEPs were Black and Brown students. This confounds the problem even more. Racial barriers and them being less prepared by not providing appropriate transition planning and on-the-job training can significantly impact their success and future livelihoods. In my introduction, I said that the purpose of my testimony today was to speak on behalf of my son. That is true, but I am also speaking out for all of the families and teachers moving through that same integral, confusing, and constraining maze without the support and training they need. It is a maze that leads students to a place of uncertainty, the unknown, and for many, nowhere. I am speaking now to you, City Council members, and all others who, by not making or advocating for changes, are complicit in providing minimal to no opportunities for students with disabilities transitioning to adulthood. I speak to all of you who assert that they want to see all students in the district thrive, regardless of ability, income category, neighborhood, and yes, skin color. I challenge you to provide appropriate transition planning workshops to our educators. I challenge you to offer meaningful supports for families navigating this new territory. I challenge you to create more partnerships and opportunities that provide on-the-job training and competitive employment fields and multiple integrated part-day supervised rotational programs. Our children, All of our children deserve opportunities to reach their fullest potential during and after their time spent in the classroom. Students, families, and communities should not be penalized due to policies, procedures, and systems that have been proven not to work. I implore you to be the change agents that our families and communities need. I asked you, what would you do if you could not afford private school for your child with a disability? What would you do if it were your child with a disability that was marginalized? Thank you again for listening to me today.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I see Mr. Spence is here, and we're going to add one other person to this panel. Justin Salisbury will go after Mr. Spence, and then we'll have questions for the panel. Mr. Spence, if you could take yourself off mute. Mr. Spence, if you could state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Antonio Spence. My son, Antonio William Spence, graduated from the District of Philadelphia in June of 2019. My son has been playing video games since he was 11. All of his school papers were about games and the people who played games and the statistics of it. Every Christmas and birthday, he wanted a new game or a new system. He loves them so much that his goal after finishing high school was to go to college to become a video game designer. My son is a hard worker when it comes to getting things done. While he's had an IEP throughout much of his time in the district, my son and I have made clear that his goal after high school was to attend college. During his 10th to 12th grade years, I always asked his teachers and his IEP team whether he was on target for college, and the reply was always the same: yes, he was. My son's report card reflected the same sentiments as reported by the staff. His grades were A's and B's. After reviewing his final IEP, not fully understanding the numbers and the relationship to grades I was receiving, I asked a friend to review it for me. To my surprise, she reported that my hardworking son was on a 6th to 8th grade level in math and reading, nowhere near a college level. Furthermore, my son struggled on the SATs twice, in part because he took them without disability accommodations. No one in the school ever told us he could apply for accommodations on the SAT. This lack of accommodations was surprising given that my son received accommodations throughout high school and the school signed my son up for the test. Thankfully, my son and I were able to get him additional supports through a lawsuit. We now have an educational consultant who has provided him with tutors who work on all the knowledge he has missed over the years and make sure that he successfully transitions to college. He is doing quite well now, and it looks like he may be able to start college in the spring or fall of 2021. The educational consultant is also going to help my son register for disability accommodations once he starts college. My son and I did not know the process of getting accommodations in college was even granted. This information is something the school district should have provided to us as part of him being prepared for college. The school district of Philadelphia needs to do more to make sure that students like my son who are in general educational classes have an IEP, understand their challenges and what supports allow them to successfully, so that their students will be able to successfully transition to adulthood. And to file a lawsuit shouldn't be their only resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spence. Mr. Salisbury, if you're available, we'll have you testify now.
Spacebar. Turn camera button to activate. Press spacebar. Your video is on.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Super glad to be here representing the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania. We are an organization that has been around since 1940. We were founded in a town in Pennsylvania that is pronounced many different ways. I call it Wilkes-Barre. And here in the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania, we do a lot of work on a lot of these things. We are a group of blind people that basically have gotten together to speak for ourselves, because until that point in 1940, a lot of times it was the service providers and the teachers and the doctors that would come and speak for us. And we generally found that we had different priorities and we needed to speak for our own needs. And the biggest thing that we do find as an issue, and I've heard it a lot today, is low expectations. And one thing, so that I'm not being repetitive, that I might just add is that a lot of times when we come to these public hearings, we find that there are people that, whether or not they're being open about it, in the back of their minds, they have this fear that there's a hypothetical person with a disability who just can't make the cut, who can't be rehabilitated. They're just so disabled beyond the point of return. They can't be fixed, they can't be helped, they can't be taught, and they can't work. And I mean, I've been in receipt of those messages from society too, quite frankly. I'm a blind person. I work with the blind all the time. I'm always working to raise these expectations, but I myself receive those attitudes from society too. So we have to do our best to keep each other strong and to not listen. And ultimately, we believe in our hearts that that idea that somebody out there could be so disabled that we can't fix them is really just a myth. It's a lie that we've been taught, but it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if we don't provide the right services and the right interventions. There are some people who maybe aren't ready to step into a job today, but if we gave them the right supports and the right interventions, they would be able to work. We just have to provide them the right supports. A lot of times, because as a society, we've been transitioning away from this manufacturing workforce culture, but a lot of us are still close to it. And quite frankly, that working class group of people is largely who have traditionally been served by the public schools. And so then we end up getting into this workforce culture where it's hard for us to think outside the box, because in our families, the people that go to work and they work on the assembly lines and everything, we're taught there's exactly one way to do everything. And we're not given the latitude to innovate, to improvise, to come up with new ways to do things. But people with disabilities have to do that. That's how we overcome the challenges imposed by our disabilities. And so a lot of times it's hard for us to get into that mindset, but we can do it. And it just takes a little bit of becoming open and flexible. Now, those sub-minimum wages and the workshops that were mentioned by some of the earlier speakers, I totally agree with the points that I've heard, and our members across the state very much agree with those points. The sub-minimum wage really undermines the transition services. And part of how it does that is that if we look at how we measure as a community what we expect from schools, the productivity of the kids graduating from those schools and what we expect of that is based on the minimum threshold of what it will take for those kids to enter the workforce and to contribute in a job and to create value for their employer. But the problem is, for people with disabilities, there is no minimum wage. Of course, in Pennsylvania, it's part of our statewide minimum wage. That's Section 4D of that, and then federally, Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, as amended. The reality is that because we can walk into work at 3 cents an hour, 4 cents an hour, 7 cents an hour, there is no expectation of productivity that we have to meet. So the schools only have to produce people that are worth 3 cents per hour. And that is a big problem because there's really no ability to fail. So there's no threshold of productivity that we have to get the kids over so that we can assess our schools to be achieving. So that really undermines all of these transition services if at the end of the day, we don't have to be productive because we're not expected to be worthy of a minimum wage. So that practice has to be eliminated. Now, at the city level, I understand we can't set a minimum wage, but we can do things to sanction the practice. And so at a city level, we could consider things like divesting from any place that pays a sub-minimum wage. We could look at things like blocking other types of contracts and leases and things like that. We can find ways to chase them around a little bit, or even to at least issue a statement that we don't believe in it by divesting, even if we're not doing it right now, because we may not be partnering with anyone like that at all. Now, there are these sheltered workshops, which are very much based on that piecework, manufacturing, economy type of thing a lot of times. And those also are situations where our people are not taught to innovate. We're not taught to solve problems. There are jobs that are specifically for people with disabilities, and then there are jobs that supervise us that are specifically for people without disabilities. It causes a lot of problems, and it teaches us unproductive behaviors. Now, a lot of times people assume that only the most severely disabled people get put in those sub-minimum wage jobs or sheltered workshops. Well, interestingly enough, less than a month ago, a report was issued by the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, or the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, that investigated this whole practice and concluded that actually the people that were workers with disabilities that were being paid a sub-minimum wage were not statistically significantly different in their disabilities than the people who were receiving a sub-minimum wage. So if they were receiving less, or if they were receiving a normal competitive wage, that wasn't actually related to them being more disabled. So that definitely blows open that idea that we've had for a long time, that it's only the most severely disabled. Segregationism is a big problem for us. Now, we know it's common discussion here in Philadelphia that our public schools are very much segregated. We understand that the average kid in the Philadelphia public schools doesn't look like me. And there are different ways that Philadelphia public schools are treated because of that. But we also know in the blind community that we've had a long history of segregation and kids being put into residential schools for the blind, where they're kept out of sight and out of mind for the rest of society, where we're taught certain special things. That's great. What we've also a lot of times failed to discuss when we talk about civil rights and desegregation is that the lead constitutional scholar on Brown versus Board of Education was not a person of color. It was a blind man. He was a law professor at UC Berkeley. He was also the president who founded the National Federation of the Blind in 1940 here in Pennsylvania. His name was Jacobus Tenbrook. Jacobus Tenbrook understood segregation very well because we experienced that in the blind community as well. And one thing that he understood and that we still understand today is that the liberation of people of color and the liberation of people with disabilities are two deeply entangled concepts. And they cannot and should not be disentangled. We should be fighting for our liberation together. And so we want to make sure that anytime we talk about disability rights, we've also got to talk about the race factor. And anytime we talk about racial oppression, there's usually a disability factor too, because a lot of times, for example, people of color have been wrongfully accused of being developmentally disabled or intellectually inferior. And that's not actually true, but it's been wrongly accused and assigned many, many times. Even I can remember in the mid-90s, we would talk about NFL quarterbacks and how, oh gosh, well, we're starting to have black quarterbacks that are smart enough. No, they've always been smart enough. We just didn't treat them that way. And so, we look with kids to help desegregate with the blind. There are these immersion school models. And these immersion school models generally involve having a lot of the blind kids from one given area clustered in one school. But it's not only blind kids that are there. There are sighted kids too. And the benefit that creates is that it's not a second-class curriculum that's only for the blind. They'll be surrounded by sighted kids, and the education will have to be good enough for the sighted kids as well. But what we find is that then we can cluster the professionals to provide those services. We find in Philadelphia that there's a huge lack of qualified professionals and of resources to provide those services in the schools. In the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there's exactly one person who is nationally certified to teach Braille, and that person is me. I don't even teach kids. There is nobody teaching kids who is nationally certified in Braille in the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Same thing for cane travel. There is one person in the state, the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, with the national certification to teach cane travel. To teach kids how to use a cane to walk around. There's one person. That person is me, and I don't teach kids. So we see what's happening with the kids, and it's not good. We need to be recruiting people to our state. I mean, we can grab them out of New Jersey or Maryland or New York. I mean, there are people around. We just got to recruit them. And we've got to make sure that the education of the kids in Philadelphia is prioritized, that they do deserve to have these nationally certified professionals. I'm not saying I'm the best. I just happen to be the only one with the licensures. And we need to make sure that that happens here. We need to see the school district partnering with the Bureau of Blind and Visual Services. See, a lot of us talk about OVR as if it covers everyone, and it kind of does. Within OVR, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, there are two bureaus. There's the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, which is for all the disabilities except blind. And then there is the Bureau of Blind and Visual Services. Now, as far as we know, in the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania, the Bureau of Blind and Visual Services does not cooperate and work with the School District of Philadelphia. And we don't blame that on any particular party there, but it simply isn't happening. There is no interaction. So while we see those low rates for the transition services in general for disabilities, for the blind, we can tell you with certainty that it is zero. That there is no collaboration to provide the transition services to any of the kids who are blind. So that creates a big problem for us. So I think part of the problem is that there are key players who just aren't talking to each other, who just aren't working together. And we're not blaming that on anybody. But it just needs, the two sides need to be brought together and the services need to be provided. There is programming to fill the gap. One of the biggest things you can do is help connect these kids in the schools with the organizations of people with disabilities locally. Because we will help with the mentoring and all those other things. We already want to do that. So a lot of those things to help get people along and to help get people started, we can do that. One of the biggest things that needs to be done is training the parents. A lot of times the parents don't know. I know my parents didn't. Parents don't know what it is that their kid needs. We're not born with that knowledge. Society doesn't teach all of us what every kid with disabilities needs. And we don't teach everyone in our society what those rights are. So we've got to train the parents, but we can't depend on the schools to do it. Nothing against the schools, but it's a conflict of interest. It wouldn't make any sense for the schools to say to the parents, these are the services your kid deserves, then not deliver them and say, you should hold us accountable. It doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't work that way. And so we need to find a way to offer some training seminars. Perhaps even the city council could arrange it. And it could be those types of meetings where the council districts have meetings by district, and then the same presenters go around from meeting to meeting and basically present the same topic in our local council meetings. I've seen that kind of thing happen with things like the census. Why not do that with something like the transition services? And I think if we do that, we've got to advertise to all the parents, not just the ones who have kids with documented disabilities, because there must be kids that don't have documented disabilities because we haven't been providing the right services to do even the things like diagnose. So we've got to make sure that every parent receives this information and that we put together some programs where we can have advocates that can help train the parents on these rights that they have. And in conclusion, I just want to add again on the point that, I recognize I am a mixed race person. Both my grandfathers are white. Both my grandmothers are women of color. In my family, I have two nicknames, white boy and college boy. And you can bet that white boy helped me get college boy. And I know that it did. And, because the average kids in the school district here in Philadelphia don't look like me, I know their education is not valued the way that it should be by our society. And so we go around and we say that Black Lives Matter. And when I say that, I'm thinking of my grandmothers and my cousins. I'm thinking about those things. But we've got to make sure that we provide the kinds of things like investing in the education of Black children, like helping Black children to get opportunities to go on to get good jobs and get the higher education. We've got to make sure that all of these things are non-discriminatory systems. And we feel very strongly that these problems are getting in the way of the transition services being provided properly. So really, all these services, until we really fully, as a society, embrace the idea that Black Lives Matter, we will not have the services that we need functioning the way that they need to. And so this is all a part of one greater struggle that we in Philadelphia know very well. So the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania is very grateful to be invited to present here. I'm grateful to be a part of it. And we want to let everyone know that we stand ready to help in any way possible to develop any of these programs to help make sure that blind youth have the transition services they need.
Thank you for your testimony. I want to thank all the witnesses that testified on this panel. I'm going to allow my colleague, Councilmember Mark Swiller, to ask a question, but I want to extremely thank Ms. Johnson, Ms. Thompson, Ms. Ang, Ms. Gabor, Mr. Spence, Ms. Williams, and also both Justin Gabor and Justin Salisbury for your testimony. As a parent with a child on the spectrum who is 19, I can relate to I can relate to all of your testimonies, having the navigation process of going through the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, dealing with an IEP and all the acronyms that you have to learn in order to provide the services that you need for your child. Is something that my wife and I have struggled with over the years, and we constantly are struggling with that to this day, especially during this pandemic. I am in one room and my son is in a separate room, and at times I'm doing council hearings with him right next to me in order to help him through virtual learning through his class. And so there were so many great points and statements that were made in this hearing, and I think all of you have provided a perspective on all of the challenges that we have here in the city of Philadelphia in the school district, and also with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And really, it's a navigation. And I think, Ms. Thompson, you made such a great point about your son's octagon and not box. So we need to look at all of these factors and perspectives. And as we try to improve services for our family and our friends and the children in the city of Philadelphia as they transition out of education. So with that, I'll have my colleague, Councilmember Squilla. I know you had a question for Ms. Ang. If you both could put your video on. I'm not sure if there's any other members of council that would like to ask a question. And then after their questions, we'll move into the panel from the school district.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for taking the time. And Dawn, I really appreciate the efforts and education you have provided, not only through your learning skills, but also to help council understand this and the school district. And you mentioned a number. You mentioned, I think it was 1,200 eligible people to receive transition services through the school district.
Yes.
Do you think that number has been consistent?
No, the 1,230 figure was only for 12th graders in the 2018-2019 year. I believe that in that year, there were 5,888 students with IEPs who were from 9th through 12th grade. So looks like, it's probably at least 1,000 per year, per grade. And I think that sounds right. Perhaps the district can confirm that later.
Right, we'll see. Well, they're going to speak next. And I was just trying to get your input on that. And do you feel, just from I know you went through it, but obviously the transition coordinators would be the people who would guide that. And I think that's probably where our challenge is, and how many coordinators you would have to be able to address this.
Yes, I believe the district has one coordinator now. Sorry, Mark.
One coordinator for the whole city.
That's what I believe.
Okay, so I think we have a lot of work to do. I appreciate your input, and looking forward to have more conversations with you and the district. And I have some questions for the school district that I'll be asking once they are done their testimony.
Right.
So
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councilmember Squilla and Ms. Ang. If there are any other council members that would like to ask a question, once again, I just want to reiterate my thanks to all of the witnesses on this last panel. All of you have demonstrated your advocacy for your children. As I was listening to each and every one of you testify, I could make a reflection or a connection on an individual journey that my family has taken as we have tried to provide the best experience for my son. And I can relate to all the various issues and concerns and challenges that you will be able, that you provide for your children. And also for both Justin's self-advocacy is so important. We need to continue to promote self-advocacy. Although I am someone that is a parent with a child on the autism spectrum, and I say that's the most important title I have is father, more important than being a member of council or a lawyer, is father. But even with all the work that I do every single day to help support my son, I will never be able to fully walk in his shoes. And so it's important that we listen to those who have a physical learning difference, to hear their perspective and not hear, even though I'm a parent, my interpretation of the challenges that they are dealing with. So I thank you both so much for your voice for this afternoon's panel. At this point, seeing no other questions for this panel, Mr. Terry, if you could read the names of the speakers on the next witness list. I want to have the school district testify to give an opportunity for them to respond to some of the comments made by parents and self-advocates, just in case they may have to leave, but want to kind of connect those two together. And then after the school district, we'll hear from providers. Mr. Terry, if you could read the names for our next panel.
Siobhan Savage, Sonia Berry, and LaQuinta Montanez.
And as representatives from the School District of Philadelphia are coming on to testify, we did reach out to the State Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. They had indicated they would be here to testify. That's why you see their names represented on the witness list. However, we received an email early this morning stating they would not be able to do so. So we'll be providing information from today's hearing to OVR, or the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. One of the major issues and concerns is making the point crystal clear that there is a need for additional services for the thousands of young people in the city of Philadelphia that are transitioning beyond education, and what is the steps that will be taken by the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to enhance those services. Because when you listen to the testimonies of the last panel, there's clearly a disconnect, and in these situations, often the parent is the one doing all of the connection for these services and being the advocate. And if a parent does not have the ability or the resources to be able to do that based on various challenges they may be having in their own household, those services are not being received, and that child is not getting the opportunity to be the best person that they can be with all the services to benefit them for the future of their lives. So I am happy that representatives are here from the School District of Philadelphia, so we can hear from them and they can respond to those witnesses on the last panel. And we'll continue to advocate and connect with the State Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. With that, we'll start with Ms. Savage, and then we'll hear the other two witnesses. If you could state your name for the record, then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Siobhan Savage, and I am the Deputy Chief for the Office of Specialized Services with the School District of Philadelphia. I appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony today regarding this resolution and really to focus on examining our current and best practices on secondary transition here in the school district and what it is that we do and intend to do for our Philadelphia public school students with diverse learning needs. Thank you to Councilman Green in particular and the members of this committee on people with disabilities and special needs for inviting the school district to attend today. I do have a presentation prepared so that we have a visual to go with our testimony this morning, as we thought it would be important to make sure that we are able to provide something for folks that who are best served visually to see. So if you could give me one moment. I do have with me today Ms. LaQuenta Montanez and also Ms. Sonia Berry. Ms. Montanez is the secondary transition, well, she's the transition coordinator for the School District of Philadelphia. And Ms. Sonia Berry is our executive director for school-based supports. While they are here today participating, I will be proceeding through the presentation and presenting the information that we've gathered. The School Districts of Philadelphia's mission is to deliver on the civil right of every child in Philadelphia to an excellent public school education. I began my actual tenure here in the school district on June 29th of this past year, coming to the role of Deputy Chief of Specialized Services after being a principal in the school district for the past 4 years at a school in West Philadelphia. For additional background on me, I am also a recovering attorney and have practiced education law, but I've also served as a teacher and have supported special needs students throughout my career. I come to this work with passion and hope and a true vision for what it is that the district can do for our students that are diverse learners as we move forward. A brief overview of secondary transition, and we have heard quite a bit of this already during this testimony, but we aim to promote the movement from high school to adulthood for our students, and it is a coordinated set of activities, services, and goals. This leads to successful post-secondary outcomes for our children with the idea that when they leave the school district, whether it's through IEP goals or graduation or they age out, they are prepared for adulthood. Currently, we have a number of programs in secondary transition, and there are a number of programs that were already named by some of the panelists that have testified prior to us. We do use community-based instruction programs, and that is not limited just to our secondary transition programs or our high schools, but we also use community-based instruction in some of our other programs. We have community-based vocational training, the Bridges School to Work program. We also have Project Search and Project Career Launch, which at this point in time actually contain 48 students across both programs, including a Project Search student that works directly in the Office of Specialized Services with us. We have SEPTA travel training, and we currently do have transition centers in 2 locations, Martin Luther King High School and South Philadelphia High School. What we have endeavored to do since I begun in June is to really look at our professional development trainings and our programming for our secondary transition program within the school district. We have endeavored to, just this past August, proceed with a very extensive training for our vocational itinerants in both Indicator 13 and Indicator 14. We also have had training in writing effective transition goals. We've had training in different assessments and how agencies can be better involved in IEP meetings. And we've also been doing training around progress monitoring and data collection for our transition programs and for students that have very specific goals related to their IEPs. We've also started to look at what we like to call high leverage practices. Our instructional programming team within the Office of Specialized Services has actually been doing extensive research into different high-level practices. And the idea is for us to determine what is going to best serve our students and use the research to definitely determine what those practices will be. We have started to explore the Naviance scope and sequence for transition age students. We also examine heavily the Future Ready PA Index. We're using ONET Online and a quick book of transition assessments, as well as different career inventories and assessments to help and assist our teams in best planning for students. Another high leverage practice is around collaboration and focusing heavily on the interagency supports that we can provide students and how we can connect with those agencies outside of the district. So you can see here, we do have a relationship with OVR as well as some of the other programs and agencies in the area to provide supports for our students. And we endeavor to not only train our staff, both our vocational itinerants, but also our counselors and our school teams, including teachers, on how to access these different supports. But we want to make sure that we are communicating with families as well, how to access supports that may lie with even outside of this. Another high leverage practice is instruction and making sure that we have the best practices in secondary transition planning we possibly can have. We have also created a special education instructional framework, which is really an instructional framework to support our teachers with resources, strategies, and a true outline of what the expectations are for instruction in our special education programs. We have an Indicator 13 rubric checklist at this point, as well as an Indicator 14 post-school outcomes checklist. We've also been really trying to focus heavily with our teams on the difference between credits for purposes of a diploma and meeting IEP transition goals, and what progress monitoring and data collection are necessary for our students. And I also wanted to mention our high leverage practice in compliance, but I have mentioned compliance last because it is most important to us as we are endeavoring to serve children, that we pay close attention to the substance of their programming and working with families to determine where the family and that student would like their student to actually go and what they'd like to achieve when they actually leave the school district. Obviously, Indicator 13 and 14 are part of the requirements that the school district has to meet as far as our metrics for the state. However, they are also best practices that really are useful in supporting school teams and moving students towards their post-secondary goals and designing programming that support those goals. We have already started to discuss and put into place some long-term secondary transition planning for the district as a whole. As we are seeing an increase in the number of students that require special education supports and services, it's become apparent that we not only need additional support in terms of resources and finances to program for our students appropriately, but we need to make sure that we are clear about our vision for secondary transition planning and make sure that we have access to what it is that our students will need. We have already begun to investigate the adoption of additional transition curricula. We've also started to speak with and talk to agencies about increasing collaboration. And we are very interested as well in expanding our program down into middle schools. Transition planning should not start just at 14, as has been mentioned by previous panel members. It's vital that we start talking with students as young as third grade about what it is that they intend to do when they leave the district. We also would like to establish additional transition centers at our comprehensive high schools district-wide so that we can provide the supports and services that our students need in places that are closer to them. And at this point, I will stop sharing my screen as that is the conclusion of our presentation. We intend to be collaborative, inclusive, and very heavily focused on students and families first. And again, we appreciate the invitation to testify today and look forward to answering any questions as we can.
Thank you, Ms. Savage, for your testimony. If you could put me on mute so we're not, okay, there we go, thank you. If there's someone else in the room with you that may be causing the echo, if they're also Microsoft Teams, so that other person could put themselves on mute. That way we don't have the echo. I know my colleague, Councilmember Squilla, has some questions for the school district. You provided a great deal of information regarding professional development at the school district, as well as changes and updates to the curriculum. But I did have a few questions based on some of the things that came out by various panelists, especially the parents that testified earlier. So can you give us a number of how many students are eligible to receive transition services in the school district for the 2020 through 2021 school year? And has that number remained consistent over the last 3 school years?
I actually do not have that information with me. I was not sure whether or not it would be requested, but we absolutely can gather that information and share it with council.
Okay, if you could share that with council. There'll be some other questions, and if you could just share that as a memo to me as chair, and we can provide that information to the other members of this committee. Also, I wanted to kind of ask some questions in reference to the coordination with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. One of the concerns that's been raised by the various panelists in reference to the transition services. You did make reference to a goal for having providing transition services earlier, not just waiting to 14, but actually starting a lot earlier in the process, like middle school. But there's only one transition coordinator for the school district of Philadelphia. There are thousands of students eligible to receive these services. Now, what is the district's plan to increase capacity around transition planning?
I think the capacity piece is very important, and it's also important for us as a district to recognize that it's not just the transition coordinator that is responsible for supporting these transition goals. We need to make sure that our teachers and our school teams, as well as our counselors, are prepared to support our children at the school level, which is part of why we're endeavoring to do professional learning for those teams and those staff over the next 2 years. In particular, we're looking at indicator 13 and 14 training. We also are, because we are looking at curriculum in particular and bringing additional curriculum online, looking at training our staff in the use of assessments in these new curricula, as well as how to capture the data and truly plan for our students so that we have a physical plan to give to families that they can refer to. I'm sure you know IEPs are onerous to read and they can be extremely long. The idea is for us to provide things that are digestible and understandable to our families and also to our students. Children need to understand how to best plan for themselves, and they need to advocate for themselves and be included in this process. And we definitely are moving in that direction. It's very hard to engage a child that has not been engaged in the conversation about their own future.
Thank you for that response. And I appreciate the investment that's being made in reference to training teachers on transition because they're part of the educational village for children and for parents and guardians, as well as investing in curricula that will help students as they're doing a transition. But that's one aspect. When you think about transition services, it reminds me of like a guidance counselor. You would not have just one guidance counselor for the entire school district of Philadelphia, because you have a number of different children that need services. And just like I believe it was Ms. Thompson, her testimony, and she's been an advocate for these issues for a number of years. I've seen her in a number of different conferences and activities advocating for her child. If you know one child on the autism spectrum, that means you've met one child on the autism spectrum. And I would broaden that to those that have a visual impairment, and you heard Justin talk and testify earlier, or a hearing impairment. Just because you've met one person that has a physical or learning difference, that means you've met one person. So having that additional investment on curricula for students in the school district for transition is a great thing. Having that additional investment for teachers to be able to help their students with transition is also a good thing. But we also need to have additional staff that's specifically focused on transition services for this population of students.
You are correct. And I think, too, it might be useful if we explain the differences between a vocational itinerant versus our transition coordinator. Our transition coordinator actually sits within our instructional programming team in the Office of Specialized Services, and she does the research and helps us to locate the curricula. She develops the depth of expertise, and she helps structure the transition program for the district. She also supervises our vocational itinerants, and that is where we expect to expand the number of people that are available to support schools, as they are the ones that actually interact most with schools. They serve most of the time 1 to 2 schools. They're assigned based upon caseload, and they are a resource and a support for the school-based teams and the counselors in that particular 1 or 2 schools. What we would like to see and do, though, is expand the number of vocational itinerants that we have so that they can provide more specific support and be aligned with smaller caseloads than they currently have.
Okay. Thank you for providing some more context to that question. I have a question in reference to, and I started to touch on this earlier, about improving the coordination and collaboration with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Unfortunately, they are not here, although we anticipated them being here to testify so we could start to use this platform as a way to enhance that coordination, collaboration. But can you speak on your efforts to improve that perspective?
I can. Our transition coordinator internally in the Office of Specialized Services actually does have a relationship with OVR, but what we are endeavoring to do, and we have already been in contact with OVR about sitting down and discussing additional concerns and also structuring what programming support services look like moving forward, as we are aware that there are some pieces and mechanisms that I can't speak to because OVR is obviously a state agency. However, making sure that we as a district are able to provide procedures, lists of staff and resources, access to students and buildings, opportunities for OVR to actually come in and support IEP team meetings. Us as a district receiving the same from OVR and making sure that we understand their process and know what it is that we should do, as well as the paperwork and the procedures that are necessary so that we can better coordinate, is definitely on our radar. And we have a meeting planned for next week.
And you talked about additional concerns. Can you state those additional concerns that you have?
Our concerns are largely around funding, not just for us, but also for OVR in general. I think acknowledging as well that, from even the state level, because OVR is a state agency, they work with a certain amount of funding as well. When we are asking for additional resources, we're asking, OVR to provide additional supports and services. They have a finite amount of funding as well. All of these things are interconnected. And though the actual responsibilities may lie with either the district or OVR, or perhaps even another agency, at the end of the day, the resource piece is fundamental and it is significant, especially given the number of students that we have that need these additional supports.
And I agree with you, these issues are interconnected. In fact, this Friday at 9:30, this committee will be having hearings on concerns, possible monetary cuts to programs that provide services for those that need it in the behavioral health space. I know Dr. Bowen, the interim head of the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, was not able to be here on this call. They did provide testimony, but she will be testifying on Friday morning in front of this committee regarding some of those resource issues that you alluded to. In your testimony, you provided information regarding a number of programs that provide services to help with transition. A number of panelists talked about Project Search, other programs, but those programs have limited capacity. And when you think about just the number of students just in the 12th grade who are receiving transition services, that number of programs does not fully provide services to that cohort of children. What are the steps the school district is taking to grow and broaden the number of services that can be provided? There was reference during the last panel to Hilco Development Partners, who was able to successfully purchase the former Sunoco refinery, and their plans are to make a logistics hub in Southwest Philadelphia that will provide, I've seen upwards of 10,000 jobs from destination fulfillment centers for the Amazons and the other entities as well, and that could be an opportunity for additional job creation initiatives. So I wanted to hear your perspective on how we provide more programs and initiatives for transition services to give young people real access to work environments, to help them become employed or at least receive training if they decide to go to college after they leave high school.
A large part of that is actually for us as a district tapping into our community partners. And this is where Otis Hackney's department within the Mayor's Office of Education could especially be helpful given the community schools model. It's also a situation where we can partner with some of our existing partners to see if there's opportunities for us to increase not just the number of seats, but also programming itself. We're very interested in not just expanding the seats that we currently have, but exploring new opportunities for students, including, making sure that kids that have particular interests are able to be actually paired with positions and employment opportunities that they would be interested in pursuing. So a big part of this for us is making sure that we're doing career interest inventories and also collecting the data necessary for us to make strategic plans about what it is that we do for these children moving forward. We don't want to open programs that are not going to be effective or helpful for our children, but we do want to make sure that we have the data to support the programs that we are. A program like Project Search, for example, where we can actually demonstrate we have had excellent outcomes, is ripe for the expansion of seats. Other programs, we need to make sure that we're undertaking those metrics to measure the effectiveness of those programs and make sure that we are expanding seats in those programs as appropriate.
And I meant to raise this question before when we talked about transition services. And you currently have an RFQ out for a vendor for those services. What's the status for that RFQ for a vendor to provide post-secondary curriculum professional development regarding transition?
That RFQ is currently pending. We need to establish board action for that. We are in the process now of locating funding to actually pay for the vendor that will be awarded the RFQ.
Okay. And my last question, and I want to tee this up for Councilmember Squilla, who I believe he also has some questions. We've been dealing with a global pandemic. The fact that we are even having this hearing by way of Microsoft Teams, and that's how we've been interacting with each other through all these various platforms, Zoom, Skype, WebEx, GoToMeeting. My wife and I have a running joke that we've used collectively about 15 different platforms. But in this pandemic, And when we're talking about transition services, and I can relate to this directly based on my son's experience right now at Hill Freeman, where he would be actually going out into the field much more. Well, he can't now because of COVID, but he will be actually outside of the classroom developing additional experiences and interactions, like some of the travel training that Ms. Thompson talked about, and doing it in actual time as opposed to using a cell phone and trying to model Google Maps. So how are we providing these transition services in this current dynamic of COVID-19?
Currently, these services are being provided digitally because the safety and health of our students is paramount. It is necessary for us to, actually follow the board's recommendation around maintaining our education in the digital setting at this point. Due to that, the transition services have been provided in the digital setting. And what we've had teams do is actually create what we call digital hybrid learning plans, where IEP teams, including families, are coming together and really discussing and talking about the delivery of the IEP in the digital space and what that looks like for that family and for that particular student. It's an unfortunate situation where, a lot of what we talk about in transition actually requires us and our students to be around other people. And given our current stance and our current requirements to actually follow city and state guidance around these closures, we've had to shift our programming.
Councilmember Squilla, if you could turn your video on so you can come on and ask your question. Now, I do understand the school district is starting to think about bringing young people back into the classroom, and those that have a physical learning difference, I believe, the plan is for parents to allow their children to opt in January for them to receive in-class instruction. How will that type of perspective, if children are actually going to be in the classroom that are receiving special education services, how will that impact the provision of transition services if they're now physically in the building? Will there be attempts or has there been discussion about having young people in the field or just have them in the building and still receive transitional services in some type of digital platform?
We have not yet begun to have those discussions in particular because we are still in the throes of planning for the early grades to come back. That is definitely going to be a consideration. There's multiple possibilities as school teams plan that reentry, that phase of the reentry. It could be that if it's possible and safe, students actually do go into the field in certain circumstances. It's also possible that the services come to the building. It is also possible that those services remain digital. Given Dr. Height's, letting families know that they will have the choice to remain digital or not, I think it's going to be important for us to consider that on a student-by-student basis.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for testifying. I know it's been a long day. And I know you heard Ms. Ang's testimony around 1,200 seniors that were eligible to receive transition. Do you agree with that number? Do you think it's more? Siobhan?
I think we would need to collect the data because I'm not quite sure exactly. I would want to be more precise because we have students that are actually sitting in district high schools that receive district programming through us. We have students that are in approved private schools. We also have students that are in out of district placements and RTFs. I'm wondering if that number includes all of those students, and I would prefer to actually pull the data so I can make sure that the data is clear and that we are clear about what data it is that we're giving you.
All right. Knowing, obviously, you have a tough job. It's a lot of kids out there in transition. And is there a plan for the district to expand how we work with the number of students who are eligible for this?
When you say when you say plan, or do you mean like, could you be a little more clear about the question? Is there a plan to expand the number of students that we work with over time?
No, I'm sorry. A plan to increase the capacity around transitional planning.
Oh, absolutely. And a part of what we're doing right now is gathering the data so that we can be clear about what that plan looks like, and we can expand so that we are satisfying best practices and also assigning vocational itinerants to appropriate caseloads for servicing students. All students that are age 14 and over that have an IEP in the district are entitled to transition services, and we endeavor to make sure that they are getting those transition services. And again, it's not just our vocational itinerants and our transition coordinators department, but it is school teams. So making sure that everyone is trained and we have the staff available to support all of the students is definitely something we're endeavoring on right now.
And as you know, it's a challenge, obviously, with the number of students. But when you have, how many people do you think through the transition programs are able to be eligible for jobs or partnerships through the district?
I think that's a great question, and I can't answer that succinctly either, because, for example, our students that receive itinerant support services or are, for example, in learning support programs, they participate in a lot of transition programming that's provided to our general education students, as well as programming that's specific to them. So we're talking about a very large universe of students, because we also serve our, students that have more significant disabilities, and they have a different level of support. So when you look at the full continuum of what this is for all of our children, it's extensive.
All right. Now, you work with OVR, correct?
Correct.
What are the percentage, I guess, does OVR serve per year? Do we know that?
I don't know that. The data that I think was being referenced was from the 18-19 school year. We can pull data from the 19-20 school year pre-closure to determine what that looks like.
When you coordinate with OVR on these, is that something that is done within the school district guidelines of how we're looking to help the folks transition?
I'm not sure I understand that question either. What do you mean within the school district guidelines?
Yeah, so in other words, we want to try to reach as many students as possible, right? And we
Right.
want to try to have access. We heard the young gentleman today about, wanting to work, and is that a possibility? Between OVR and between the district themselves, do you believe we're reaching everybody in order to give them access to transition moving forward? Or can we
I believe that the district in particular reaches every student within our buildings that have IEPs around transition services. I think the deeper question there is which students are actually qualifying for OVR services and whether or not we're connecting with them with OVR for those particular students. And that is a nuanced determination that school teams make. They then reach out to our vocational itinerants or their counselors so that we can make that connection to OVR. But that process starts, at definitely early high school.
And it's something that continues through graduation.
It does. And for some of our students that actually have more significant disabilities that may be in an approved private school, for example, there are at times OVR representatives assigned to just those schools to support the transition process for those students. So when you do talk about this, again, the universe of this is expansive.
And as we talk about training and professional development, do we see that all the staff receives training around transition planning, or not really?
They do.
They do.
Special education, the special education teachers in particular, yes.
All right. And as when they go through the process of this training, is it something that we as a district look at to say that we could either add something to it or take it away?
That's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at the trainings and determining whether or not they need to be expanded, and also the quality of the training and the depth of the training. You can always be just compliant, but what we would like to do is not just be compliant. We want to improve and be training. We would like to develop depth, especially for our special education teachers, for our students in middle and high school. Our middle school teachers in particular have expressed interest in beginning transition planning earlier. You'll see there's a lot of middle schools as paired with the high school process that actually have started to do that career exploration, because before you explore post-secondary goals, you're exploring secondary goals. So all of that is a continuum that we are trying to push further down into lower grades.
Are you familiar with, in the RFP, I guess, the school district put out for proposal to identify vendors who could provide post-secondary and professional development on effective practices in transition? Do we have a status on that, or was that put on hold for COVID? Do you know?
We do have a status on it. We are currently looking to locate funds, but we have actually received the proposals from the vendors so that we can proceed. And we are looking to create a board action item, because obviously an expenditure of funds of this size requires board approval.
All right, but it's something. Do you have a couple vendors that have applied for that?
Yes, I do, and I'm trying to see if I can tell you exactly how many. I have them in a folder.
Well, you could look that up on while we're.
I just have a point of information for Ms. Savage. What's the size of that contract that both Councilwoman Squill and I asked you about earlier?
$300,000.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and that will be put up to a board vote, or are you waiting? Are we waiting to see if that's going to move forward, or are you waiting for COVID-related issues to be passed?
These all things are tied together. What we did do first, we reached out to the vendors to make sure that the particular curriculum we were interested in could still be implemented in a digital setting. So we're finishing up that process now. And from there, according to board policy and procedures, it takes a little bit of time for us to get through board action items, but this is going to be, we're going to ask the board for approval to expend this money.
Does any of that change with the transition to online virtual learning? Are we going to have to modify what was requested of how we deal with transition training and basically what this RFP would help us with? I mean,
actually, we will not, because in extended school year this year, the vendors allowed us to actually test this for the digital settings. So we were working through the issues that we had surfaced during extended school year so that we could begin to proceed.
Right. And knowing that not every, obviously, person with different abilities can access remotely.
Absolutely.
Was the nature of that. Is the district going to provide appropriate transition service for those students, or are we going to just make sure they just come in? Is that, because I see that's part of the early transition plan of getting people back into the brick and mortars. Is that something that we're going to push to from November on?
Yes, we plan on phasing in the students as safe and appropriate per the school district's phased-in approach in the health and safety plan. And for the students with complex needs, the early grade students with disabilities, no matter their disability, all of the pre-K to 2 students are intended to come back at the end of November. Our complex needs students and special education students with significant needs will come back in January.
Okay, because I think we lost the ability to work with them from the beginning of the year to now. Well, hopefully we could make that up starting in January and moving forward. So, but thank you for your time and thank you for answering your questions. I appreciate your effort. This is not an easy circumstance, and we know that over time, hopefully we'll get some additional resources, but it's something that is needed, and we appreciate all your work, and it's a lot of work to do on your own, and hopefully we get you some help.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Squilla. Just want to ask one more question to Ms. Savage. You mentioned in your testimony about the additional training for individuals in the school district and also the curricula, but you also mentioned, and this goes back to the panelists that also testified, the need to start the transition services earlier, because for a number of individuals who are receiving these services, the longer breadth of time they receive services, the more important and impactful those services can be. So you talked about that desire to start it before 14. Do you see that occurring? Is there a commitment? Is there a time period or process or a dynamic that's going to occur where you're going to start providing those services before the age of 14? And will that be starting in next school year or thereafter? What's the movement in that regard?
Well, we actually don't have a timeline established for what that looks like right now. The idea is, and what we are doing in the Office of Specialized Services is actually looking at strategically planning over the next 2 years and then the next 5 years. My estimation would be that we would do it after we cycle through the next 2 years in particular, because we want to make sure that we are purchasing the materials and resources, expanding our program, moving from being just compliant to being more intentional, and also making sure that all of the students and the teachers and the families are getting the resources they need over the next 2 years in the basics. We need to establish the floor, and then from there we can expand.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Councilmember Squilla, thank you for your questions. Are there any other members of council that have questions for this panel? Hearing none, we're going to go to the last panel. I know Mr. Terry was having some technology issues. Mr.
Yes,
Terry,
but I'm here now.
Okay, so if you could read the names for the final panel.
Andrea Consenia and Mary Beth Morgan.
Okay, thank you both for being here and your patience. This has been a very long hearing, but it's often very detailed, a lot of information from a lot of different perspectives. That's been very helpful, even for someone like myself who is very versed on a lot of these issues. It's good to hear the diversity of information and perspectives from those who testified this afternoon. I want to thank you for your patience, and we'll start with, I want to make sure I get the pronunciation proper. Andrea Consigny.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. You could just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony, and then we'll hear from Mary Beth Morgan. If there's anyone else that is here that would like to testify during this hearing that has not been identified, please put your video on, but put your audio on mute, and we'll hear from you at that point.
Wonderful, thank you. Hi, I'm Andrea Consenia. Good afternoon, Councilmember Green, members of the Philadelphia City Council, and other distinguished guests. I, Andrea Consenia, am the Division Director of Employment Services and Community Participation Supports at SPIN, a nationally recognized provider organization whose mission is to provide the highest quality, people-first services and supports for children and adults with intellectual, developmental, and autism spectrum disabilities, so that each may achieve and enjoy a life of possibilities. For 50 years, SPIN's mission and values-led services have supported thousands of children, adults, and families to live inclusive lives in their community across southeastern Pennsylvania. SPIN Employment Services has a proven track record of assisting people with various disabilities to find and maintain community employment. Community employment is defined as employment in an integrated community-based setting where the employee earns pay at or above the minimum wage. The 200 people supported by SPIN Employment Services all have an intellectual. Approximately 50 also have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and another 60 have a co-occurring mental health diagnosis. 36% of people supported by employment services are between the ages of 21 and 31. This statistic demonstrates excessive recent increased access. However, there is still done to increase opportunities for meaningful work experience while still in school and secure buy-in from the local business community. Historically, SPIN Employment Services supported people after graduation to explore and pursue their employment goals. While hundreds of people to be successfully employed across the region, many people weren't connected with their until years after graduating high school. Between graduation and employment services left many young adults with a disability sitting at home, losing skills and motivation. We invested in our transition services program over 10 years ago to create a system available to transition-aged youth starting at age 14. Transition services contributes to early expectations and conversations about employment and goals for life after graduation. For Employment First is to begin transition fully at 14 so that families understand that employment is the first and preferred outcome. At its the transition teams consist of a student, their family and support system, teachers, school transition coordinators, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, adult service supports coordinators, and an easier and seamless transition from the routines to the new and heightened conditions of the adult world. We want students to graduate with a clear and exciting plan for their life. I'd like to share the story of a young transition from a Philadelphia. His family, school, ODR, of developmental programs or ODP, and SPIN. Built his resume prior to graduation. Maurice, his mother, and his teachers saw so much talent and potential in Maurice, especially his proficiency with computers and design. Maurice was paired with an employment specialist, and together they discovered an opportunity at the Portside Arts Center. Through OVR's pre-employment transition services, Maureen was able to gain real-world experience working with young students in the art world. Maurice was responsible for setting up the classroom with the necessary art supplies and observed the head teacher guide the students through the activity or craft of the day. After Maurice graduated high school, he continued his journey to employment and completed an OVR community-based work assessment. With his SPIN employment specialist, Maurice was able to dive deeper into the employment world. He observed a local graphic design artist build banner logos for YouTube and helped check out customers at a local bookstore. After Maurice completed his community-based work assessment, he moved into ODP's job finding services. Maurice continued working with a SPIN employment specialist and eventually interviewed and was hired by the local Dollar Tree. Maurice was so proud to get his first job. He was excited that he could walk to work independently, earn his own money, and continue to build his resume. While he knew that Dollar Tree wasn't where he would spend his career, he was nevertheless proud of his accomplishment. Collaboration was key to Maurice's employment success during his transition years and supported a full and meaningful life after graduation. Maurice's story highlights true collaboration and person-first transition planning. It's a prime example of how different funding sources and providers can work together to help create a path for students to gain experience in the employment world. In contrast, when a student doesn't have these essential supports working in synchronization, the student and their families can feel confused and experience delays in essential services post-graduation. Schools must have the resources needed to provide careful and person-centered transitioning planning for each student to succeed. Further, it is essential that school personnel have the time and resources dedicated to dedicate themselves to the enormous task of transition planning and implementation. This important work cannot fall on the shoulders of teachers alone. Especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic, we must acknowledge the collective responsibility for all stakeholders to support students in quality transition supports and planning for their futures. There are many barriers that can get in the way, and we must work together to ensure that students reach their outcomes of accessing their rightful services and transitioning into adult services. The team approach to transition is more important now than ever, as educators are navigating the new world of virtual learning and the transition back to face-to-face instruction in the midst of increasing health and safety procedures. Transition-age students with disabilities are more successful post-graduation if they've had meaningful employment experience while still in school. Work-based learning or internships are an example of a path to success. Through these experiences, students have an opportunity to spend part of their school day working in the community. Students are encouraged to link their interests, talents, and skills into vocational themes. While school-based employment instruction is meaningful, students learn best in real-world environments outside of the school. Work-based learning provides students the opportunity to get a better understanding of how the business world operates and to gain greater insight into what their personal career aspirations are. SPIN has successfully partnered with the Philadelphia School District and the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to provide pre-employment transition services to over 1,000 Philadelphia transition-age youth with positive long-term outcomes for the students. Through the combination of SPIN's classroom-based employment preparation curriculum, the Career Development Series, and work-based learning experiences in the community, students were better prepared for life after school. Students who participated in these services have gone on to gain successful employment, attend trade schools and colleges, and live full lives in their community. I'd like to share some additional statistics to further illustrate the impact of successful employment for people with disabilities. 142 of the 200 people supported by SPIN are currently employed. These people last year earned a total of $712,000. And I always like to share this number because I think it's really impactful that these are people who are earning money, paying taxes, and really contributing to their community. On average, the 142 people we support earn $9.45 per hour, which is $2.20 above the minimum wage. They work on average 50 hours a month and have been employed at the same business for approximately 4 years on average. Each of these talented employees has shown that with the proper supports and opportunities, they can be a valuable, reliable asset to the Philadelphia business community. For most of us, a full life includes employment. It defines our passions, our values, our financial security, and our relevancy. Employment gives us a reason to get up each morning and the opportunity to do work in which we can take pride. Employment is essential to full citizenship for all of us, including those with disabilities. Employment for people with disabilities has many other positive impacts. It increases self-worth, builds relationships, and improves access to community resources. As full citizens, people with disabilities in the labor force have a positive financial impact on Philadelphia's economy, generating income that is ultimately returned in the form of tax revenues and the purchases of goods and services to boost the economy. Employees with disabilities are valued members of their workplace, where they're able to earn wages that are consistent paid to those without disabilities. SPIN's 100 business partners and community partners have embraced the benefit of hiring people with disabilities. The employment of people with disabilities adds to the diversity of their workforce and the general enrichment of their communities. Philadelphia needs more business leaders to champion this cause and carry the message forward. One area with great potential is employment and student internships within city offices. While there are many opportunities for employment and student internships within the city of Philadelphia, the civil service exam and inflexible job descriptions pose a significant barrier to people with disabilities gaining employment within the city. Student internships are a great recruitment tool and offer students the opportunity to showcase their abilities and create a pathway toward employment. In my professional experience, applicants may have the skills and talents to successfully perform the job responsibilities, but the civil service exam is a barrier to their serious consideration for the position. To improve the employment picture for people with disabilities, it is essential that Philadelphia expand current programmatic efforts within its schools to include real work experience for students with disabilities in partnership with city offices and departments or other community business partners. This begins by setting the expectation for work early and helping students understand and discover their unique talents and capacities. It requires that teachers are given the resources to not only connect with the business community, but the staffing to support students within the community. Far too often, students have graduated high school without adult services in place to support employment and they have no other option but to sit at home, losing both motivation and the skills they and their teachers have worked to achieve through their education. Students who were given the opportunity to discover their employment goals through coordinated supports while still in school have succeeded in challenging themselves, reaching their outcomes, and becoming independent with support and planning from their teachers, families, and communities. To achieve this outcome for more of Philadelphia's youth and young adults, we must do more now together. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Morgan, if you could proceed with your testimony. And this will be the last call. If there's anyone else that is here that would like to testify on this resolution number 200108, please put your camera on. We can see you and acknowledge you, but keep your audio on mute. So that way we can have you testify after Ms. Morgan. Ms. Morgan, if you can state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Good evening. My name is Mary Beth Morgan. I'm an independent living specialist that focuses on youth and young adult transition at Liberty Resources, which is the Center for Independent Living for People with Disabilities in Philadelphia. Thank you, Councilman Green, City Council members, and all other participants for allowing me to speak right now. I have created a program called MTV, Mentoring Transitioning Voices, that has been taught to the young adults within the school system for the last few years, teaching them how to transition and advocate for themselves. Unfortunately, this has been put on hold due to the OVR funding 2 years ago. The philosophy of independent living is that people with disabilities of all ages should have the same civil rights and equal opportunities to control their own lives, just like non-disabled students do. Independent living is about choice and guiding students to discover the best options to meet their needs and wants. Mentoring Transitioning Voices offers transition skills that are based on how to develop and maintain relationships, build self-esteem, set personal goals, communicate with others, live an active and healthy lifestyle, as well as concentrates on working with parents and professional teams, finding out about jobs, and anti-bullying, to name a few. MTV sessions have been offered prior to the pandemic and have proven to give students confidence to interact positively with others and seek the right help when needed. All of this is completed in the framework of Liberty Resources, the Center for Independent Living in Philadelphia. The core services, information and referral, peer support, skills training, advocacy, and nursing home youth transition are intertwined through the teaching, so students, parents, and teachers have a better understanding of what is offered after school. I am proposing that MTV and the other necessary transition services be offered virtually or in person as applicable to the Philadelphia school system students as an outlet for young adults with disabilities as they experience transition with the layer of uncertainty with COVID-19 and the rest of what the world brings. Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate that I was able to speak, and be well.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Are there any other people that are here to testify on this resolution? Are there any additional questions or comments from members of this committee? I want to thank both of you for your testimony. I'm very familiar with both of your organizations. I see Councilmember Squilla is going to come on to ask a question. I'll give him a few seconds and moments to gather himself. But I'm familiar with both of you.
I just want to make one statement there.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Squilla. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make one statement, and you could hear all the advocacy, and you know that there's a lot of work needed here, and I appreciate everybody who testified, because it really helps to educate us as people in the committee. Well, I'm not on the committee, but it's a part of how we progress as a city and as a school district to make sure we're reaching each and every individual. So your advocacy is something that we really need to work with, and you are, to me, our partners and the school district's partners to make sure we do the best we can. So thank you so much, and looking forward to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember Squilla. I want to thank
Derek, you're muted. You muted yourself, Derek.
Thank you. Working in the world of COVID. But I just wanted to say thank you to my colleagues who are members of this committee and Councilmember Squilla, who has been focused on this issue, like myself, who's not a member of this committee but participated in this hearing. I think the last panel provided some sunshine and some brightness. You heard a lot of challenges and difficulty that both those who are self-advocates as well as the parents have testified regarding their challenges in providing the services for their children. You also heard from our initial panel kind of an overview of the complexities of these issues and some suggestions on how we should move forward, as also from the school district and how they are also trying to move forward and enhance the services for young people that need access to transition services with limited resources. But this has been a very informative panel. It's been very educational in a lot of ways, even for those who are very well versed on this topic, but it provides some good information for everyone that is here. And I just want to thank all of you for being here and participating in this panel. I know it's been a very long panel. I think Ms. Morgan did say it is evening, and we did start this panel in the afternoon. But this has been very, very informative. It gives a number of ideas and suggestions going forward, in particular, making sure that we have representation on the school board, as well as some of the other ideas. And then lastly, both the last panel and earlier panels talked about internship opportunities, especially within the city of Philadelphia and with members of city council. So not hearing no other additional comments or questions from members from the committee. Also, seeing no other witnesses here to testify. And we would like to then move forward with the end of this hearing. I want to thank everyone for their participation. We truly value your opinions. I know this has been a long hearing, but we want to thank you for all the input and information. And we also look forward to the school district providing that additional data that they said they would provide. We also hope that the school district will be able to provide some information on the outcome of their meeting with the State Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. We did have some questions for them. We'll also provide those questions to OVR to get their follow-up. Seeing no other comments or business to be brought before this committee, this concludes the public hearing of this committee, and we will now recess this hearing until the call of the chair. Thank you all very much for your attendance and participation in today's hearing and your input, and we'll continue the advocacy regarding this very important issue. Thank you and have a great day.